Sports. Let's continue then with our news. Well, Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga says that academic losses due to the Covid-19 pandemic could negatively impact learners' abilities to advance their careers and earnings in future. The department says it is working towards preventing further disruptions to school time as well as other learning losses.
On the 2021 school calendar, we met as MECs on Friday, the 27th of August, to consider inputs from stakeholders following rounds of consultations. Because if you remember, when we lost a week in July, we had made a commitment that we will claw back the time by looking at other measures. One of the measures that we're looking at was to make sure that we don't have the October holidays. But after consultations, it was quite clear, and for very valid reasons, that we have to keep the calendar as it stands. So after consultations regarding the already amended school calendar for academic year, we wish to really say we had to finally agree and consider as MECs that we should keep the calendar as it stands. So which means we won't be using the October holidays to claw back on time, but we've looked on other days, one day there, to see if we can still get the 5 days back. But the long and short is the calendar is going to remain as is. If parents had plans for the October holidays, they should continue their plans. So in conclusion, I really wish to ask our own local professor, Martin Gustafsson, to make a presentation focusing on learning losses, because that's what I really wanted this input to focus on, because basically we want to appeal to communities and caregivers to support us by supporting children at home. When we give them homeworks, please ensure that they complete those homeworks. When you give them tasks, support as much as you can. When we are on radio or on TV, trying to make up for lost time, we're appealing again for communities to just give them space to listen to the radio. Don't take all of your time, but also just to follow some of the programs that we're having as a sector to try and cover up and claw back on lost time. So that's why I've invited Professor Martin Gustafsson, but also asked Cheryl Weston, who's the director for curriculum, to also talk about curriculum coverage. And I think, without depressing you, you'll agree with me that there is a need to up the game, both from education, but mainly also we're reliant this time greatly on parents and caregivers to support children to stop the unraveling that we're beginning to experience in our schools.
All right, well, for more on this then, we're joined via Zoom by Executive Director for National Professions Teachers Organisation of South Africa, Mr. Basil Manuel. Mr. Manuel, it's always a pleasure to see you. A very good afternoon to you and welcome to the show.
Good afternoon, Flo. Pleasure to be with you once again.
Yeah, a number of topics that the Minister spoke on. I mean, from teen pregnancies to the return of primary school learners to vaccinations to the 2021 school calendar. I know that you and I are mostly going to be talking about the 2021 school calendar, as that's certainly on the minds of parents at this time. But I thought it was quite important just to touch on this issue of teen pregnancy, and that, you know, the Minister seemed to highlight it as you know, the first issue to go into as she was starting her briefing today. And I thought that indicates that this is quite an issue then, that this is something that's really becoming quite problematic at schools. Look, it's been going on for many, many years, this issue of teen pregnancies, but I wonder if during the time of the pandemic, are we finding that this is becoming more of an issue, given the fact that, you know, young girls, young boys, you know, so I'll use the word stuck at home and losing out on school time. I mean, how much more of an issue has this become, to the point that the Minister felt the need to address it quite a lot today?
Absolutely. NAPTOSA joins the Minister in expressing concern. We are really worried about it because, of course, it affects the life chances of the girl child in particular. And it punishes the entire family. Particularly disconcerting is the large number of children between 10 and 14, and 14, that have also fallen pregnant. And that is shocking and shameful. It's shameful for the whole country. But when children are unsupervised, one expects that there would be all sorts of things that happen. Now, that is why NAPTOSA has been steadfast in its support for schools to remain open, that we must try by all means to ensure that we do have learners still coming to school. because school is a safer place than out there. And of course, we see that with many things, including the scourge of teenage pregnancies, that too has seen an increase, which is tragic.
Yeah. Mr. Manuel, I'd like then, let's then talk on the issue of the 2021 school calendar. I mean, what is your reaction then to the minister's remarks? There were some that were concerned about the fact that, you know, the holidays would still continue, even though we've already lost so much time in the year, and that maybe these holidays would have then been, I suppose, written off. What's your stance on the issue when it comes to the school holidays?
NAPTOSA, of course, remained steadfast in a view that said we need the holidays. Remember, teachers themselves have been at school for the full year, almost the 200 days. And if it's about catch-up, we've got to also look, and it has been acknowledged, the amount of work teachers are doing over and above the 200 days that they are there. Yes, learners have lost out a lot, but 3 or 4 days is not going to do the catch-up. The catch-up is a long-term view. So we want to welcome the decision as having been a sober, considered decision, a decision that reflects the feelings of the people out there. Yeah. And that is an important one, because when we talk about the mental health of teachers, it doesn't only go to some of the interventions, psychological interventions, but it goes to a feeling of appreciation. And when people are acknowledged, both in acknowledging what they do and acknowledge that people need a break. After 50 days, you need a little break. That also assists with the mental health of both our members and our children. Remember, there are many, many children suffering from great anxieties, separation anxieties, etc. And they too need a break from the formal having to go to school all the time. Many of our teachers will be working during this break, particularly with the matriculants. Yeah. But the stress is just less. So we welcome it and we support it.
Yeah. The minister also mentioned that, you know, the department is working towards preventing further disruptions to school times. Okay, we'll park the issue of the school holidays. In your view, what exactly is the department then doing in terms of addressing the issue of, preventing further disruptions and learning losses that the minister spoke about?
As Professor Gustafsson was mentioning, it is about attending to the non-pharmaceutical measures. And he's right. All the literature is suggesting that closing schools does not necessarily create a major interruption in the advancement of the pandemic. Yeah. In schools that have low numbers, but our schools have the high numbers. And so one of the first great and longer term interventions has to be the addressing of the sheer number of learners in our schools and in our classes. And it's not going to be solved overnight, but neither is the pandemic going to disappear overnight. Yeah. So creating fewer learners per class, ensuring that we have more space for our learners, that has to be part of being on the cards. Confirming that the social distance must still be 1 meter is an important injunction, because it then also says, let's not fiddle and pack our classes like a sardine tin. And then we have these super spreaders happening, because the only thing that helps is if there is space and distance. And of course, the department has come to the party in terms of the provision of PPEs. And those are things we mustn't take for granted, because these non-pharmaceutical measures are the measures that help. Water still remains an issue in some areas, but there's a commitment, and there has been some movement there. We'd like to see more. So we're happy to embrace the idea that there are some long-term measures. We want to see more things put down on paper so that we can track and trace our progress, not only for ourselves as a union, but of course for the public at large and for the very people affected by this.
Yeah. Mr. Manuel, how concerned are you, as a union, in terms of what I will call, and you can call it anything that you want, but what I would call the increasing inequality gap? And the reason I say this is that if I take a look at how private schools have been continuing to sort of function during this time, and the lessons that were learned from last year to this year, where there have been great improvements, if I am to monitor private schools in comparison to the public schools, that to me is a little bit of a red flag in that it shows that these inequality gaps would then continue to increase, because this, at the end of the day, as the Minister said, this is long term. The effects of what's going on right now is long term for learners, all learners. And I just wonder what your view is on that, or do you believe that it won't have that much of an effect in future?
No, it certainly is going to have an impact. Remember, as soon as one has a group of people, a group of youngsters being treated and affording differently, others are going to be affording less and be less successful at it. And it's a long-term view. And some of it has to be put at the door of the department. We've had 30 years to fix it, and we haven't quite gotten there. But let's not only lament about it, let's look at what we need to do now.
Yeah.
One of the things that NAPTOSA has suggested, and let me add that the other unions are also party to these discussions, is that, number one, we need to look at the curriculum. We have an opportunity now to ensure that we take those children who are falling behind and we make a decision on whether there is greater wisdom in reducing some of those learning areas that are not critical for success in the lower grades, and concentrate on the key issues of reading, of writing, of mathematics, and then give them a better life chance later. But furthermore, we won't solve the digital divide overnight, but let's start. Let's not only lament about it and fold our hands and say it's our lot in life. We want to see that there is greater access. We know individuals can't get it by tomorrow, but surely community intervention can happen. A far greater access to data and so on. And that will start turning the tide. We know that South Africans have a large infiltration in terms of smartphones, etc., in all communities, irrespective of the general wealth. But what stands in their way is data to access some of these things. So there are things that can happen and that we need to look at in the short term. But in the long term, we need to ensure that that inequality gap is made smaller. At the moment, there is nothing that is substantive that you can say, these two things are going to change it. But, Flo, honestly, in the short and medium to long term, there are measures that we can do. And the Minister has committed herself to doing this, and the DG as well. And we are committing, as NAPTOSA, to work towards this, because we cannot leave children behind. What COVID has done is punish us, but it has also created opportunity. And one of those opportunities is to look at the curriculum and see how much more can we do in terms of 21st century technologies, which will lessen that divide that we are currently seeing.
All right, Mr. Manuel, it's always a pleasure to see you, and thank you as always for contributing to the show. Much appreciated, sir.
Always a pleasure. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. That's Mr. Basil Manuel, Executive Director for NAPTOSA, giving reaction, of course, on the briefing by the Basic Education Department. We're going to take a short break.